My name is Creon Butler. I'm the director of the Global Economy and Finance program at Chatham House. And it's a really great pleasure to welcome you all today to this conference, which is on making transgressors pay, the arguments for and against repurposing sanctioned assets of offending governments. And Chatham House is really delighted to be organizing this conference with our partners in the World Refugee and Migration Council of Canada. And indeed, you'll see there's a strong Canadian theme throughout today's program, which we very much welcome. We're also very grateful to the FCDO for their support for today's conference. I'm going to hand over shortly to Lloyd Axworthy, chair of the WRMC, for his introductory comments. But I'd first like to make a couple of framing points for today's discussion. The first is that we've been thinking about this for quite a long time. In fact, the WRMC and Van Hampson first sort of proposed it to us about a year ago. And we've been working on various sort of dimensions and so on. But actually, doing this now is actually very good timing from the point of view of key decisions that are coming up at the G7 summit in June. So we're very pleased to be doing it a month before. From my experience, doing things a month before actually is about the right timing for some of these discussions. And what we're very keen to do is to get the issues out there, maybe resolve some of them, but really inform those discussions in the G7 summit. The second point, which is a really important one, is we're taking as given in this discussion that the G7 should continue supporting Ukraine. This is for Ukraine to defend itself after Russia's unprovoked attack. And it's for the benefit of Ukrainian people, but also because it's really important to G7 security and wider security. So that is not the issue for today. The issue for today is whether or not repurposing sanctioned assets, sanctioned state assets, is the right way for the G7 to go around paying for the support that it needs to give to Ukraine. We're going to look at that from two perspectives. In our first session, we will look at the broader issues, legal, political, and financial, involved in repurposing sanctioned assets. And then in the second session, we're going to dig down into what it actually might mean in terms of implementing this in Ukraine. And we have some really excellent keynote speakers as well to go along with our excellent panelists. So that's just by way of framing. I have a few housekeeping points. We are in Chatham House today, but this is not under the Chatham House rule, so this is public. You can quote whatever you hear from our speakers, and we will be publishing online the videos, some of the sessions later on. Secondly, we have a tremendously packed agenda, and so we will need to keep moving through that agenda, and we would ask you to bear with us as we do that. We want to get as much interaction as we can from the audience, but we also need to keep to time. And thirdly, at least I am not expecting any fire alarms, so if you do hear a fire alarm, it's for real, and we should head to the fire exits if that happens. But as I say, I'm not expecting any fire alarms. So thank you. With that, I'd like to move to invite Lloyd Axworthy, the chairman of the WRMC and a former Canadian foreign minister, for his introductory comments. So Lloyd, over to you.
Thank you, Creon. And let me say I'm very pleased to participate in and appreciate the hosting of this discussion, conversation, dialogue. It happens, as you pointed out, at a very important inflection time. We always talk about issues being important, of life and death significance. I think this is literally one of those where the choices being made in public policy will have a really profound impact on the lives and deaths of a lot of people, particularly in Ukraine, but I think throughout Europe. The World Refugee Migration Council really came into the question of repurposing very early, going back to 2017, when we were working on how to provide effective deterrence and accountability for all the oligarchs and warlords and militias and mercenaries who were making themselves rich, and in the consequence creating major conflicts, displacements, and large movements of people. A member of our council, Senator Rada Olendovar, took our basic proposal and made it into a private member's bill in the Senate of Canada. And based on that, the Canadian government, under the leadership of what was then Foreign Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, actually introduced this as a legislative error. So right now Canada has a legislative base for repurposing of these assets. And why is it necessary? I think is the Ukraine invasion and conquest of Russia that goes on. What we're seeing, that Putin is mobilizing a full court press on Ukraine, and we all know what the proportionate relationship between the resources Ukraine has and what its aggressive neighbor has. And we also see that the form of aggression is not living up to any rules one would expect, but in the last several months, increasingly focusing on infrastructure, civilian targets, really trying to undermine the foundations of Ukrainian society, stability, and a sense of their own morale. So the costs are becoming enormous. And what we have been proposing all along is that the repurposing through all the work of our own legal people is quite feasible. There's nothing to prevent it. There's a certain degree of legal pettifogging going on in some circles about crossing the T's and dotting the I's about these things. But more importantly, I think it's a question of some political will, and that has got in the way really of doing what I, as a long-time elected politician, found is that we have to balance risks. In this case, the risk of the collapse of Ukraine and the increasing power of Russia in Europe versus the uncomfortable, sometimes difficult repercussions it may have on certain financial assets and banking systems. And I think what you have to really discuss today is to what degree is there a choice that actually is appropriate to the circumstances we're in. There is progress being made. I think that the recent American congressional decision on establishing repo gives them the power of repossessing. But what we do know is that there's a reticence on the part of many European states, and that their alternative, which is to say, we hope, would, or at least they hope, would be a sufficient answer is to take the interest off Russian assets. Now, the contrast is that that's maybe $5 or $6 billion a year versus the tens of billions of dollars that could be released in repurposing. To use an old phrase, it's a choice of using a water pistol and a 3-alarm fire as opposed to putting the full fire hose to place and into work. So we know that without that kind of investment and that kind of promotion, there will be an increasing sort of inability of Ukraine to not only meet its military demands, but also to rebuild and restructure itself while the war is going on. I think one of the elements that I find disconcerting, we're just always talking about what happens in the future. Well, to me, it's the reality of today that is really of concern, and that the need for a major booster shot for Ukraine. And therefore, I think that as Creon made the point, the forthcoming meeting in June of the G7 is going to be one of those inflection moments, and the tough choices will be made. And I understand that there is all kinds of sort of question marks, but hopefully the discussion today can resolve them. But I still think it comes down into a hard, serious, singular political question: is which risk is greater? disruption of some financial arrangements and organizations versus the collapse of Ukraine, and therefore a whole new resetting of our international order and the ability to maintain security and stability in Europe around the world. From a WRMC point of view, I think our own research and our own experience over the last 7 years indicates that it's time for a full-scale repurposing of the assets. Thank you very much for listening to me, and my best wishes on your ongoing conversation and dialogue.
Lloyd.